So 2023 is going to go down as an extremely good year for fans of the literary James Bond, not least of which because of this wonderful book here. But I think that leads us into an interesting conversation about what is next for Ian Fleming Publications and James Bond in the book universe. Join me for a couple of minutes and we'll chat about it. Hi guys, it's me, and I made a lot of videos recently that have been extremely critical of Ian Fleming Publications because of their decision to censor the Ian Fleming James Bond books. But it's also worth pointing out that Ian Fleming Publications have done an awful lot of really, really good stuff recently. In fact, I would say 2023 is going to go down as a really great year for fans of the literary James Bond. I'm even going to go so far as to raise a toast to them. A nice bottle of Heineken here. A little foxy bottle opener. There we go. Isn't he splendid? Right. Ian Fleming Publications, we Bond fans had an extremely good year thanks to you. And it's only June. There's a whole rest of the year to go. Think about it. What do we have? We had With a Mind to Kill, as you can see there, out in paperback, and also it's become one of the Richard and Judy book choices, which, I don't know, people who live outside of America might not know who Richard and Judy are, but they're like a British institution, and a few years ago they created the Richard and Judy Book Club, which is kind of like the Oprah Book Club except for British people. And one of the books they had this year is With a Mind to Kill by Anthony Horowitz, and I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful for a number of reasons, not least of which because it means people are finally taking James Bond seriously. I think way back when the continuation novel started with John Gardner, they were just seen as like, pulp fiction. And Raymond Benson, bless him, I mean, he's a fantastic writer, a real craftsman. But I think that kind of thing of like, oh yeah, every year they knock out a James Bond book, it's kind of pulpy. That continued. Raymond had that sort of overshadowing its work. And then Ian Fleming Publications kind of started to get a bit interesting with it. And they got Sebastian Faulks in, and they got William Boyd and Jeffrey Deaver. They got, literary writers to write James Bond. And they started doing period pieces. And they started getting really clever with it. And, the Anthony Horowitz books were like the peak of that. Anthony Horowitz's James Bond trilogy was fantastic from beginning to end. All three books were wonderful. My personal favorite was Forever and a Day, which was published 5 years ago today, I think, actually. But With a Mind to Kill was a terrific book. And the fact that it is in the Richard and Judy Book Club means that, hey, like it or not, people take James Bond in book form seriously these days. So bloody good job. Then, of course, another book I got there is Double or Nothing, which is the first in a trilogy by Kim Sherwood, in which James Bond is missing. It's a contemporary adventure set in a James Bond universe, except James Bond isn't the main character. There are 3 different 00 agents. And it's the start of a great adventure about how they come to find out what happened to James Bond. And this book, Double or Nothing, was available in the United States for the first time this year as well. So look, we got some great achievements already. Then, of course, you had the relaunch of the original James Bond books. Contentious issue, not going to lie. I'm very salty, actually. I'm extremely salty because Ian Fleming Publications decided to censor those books, which is a horrible decision. Yet, we can also say, look, great job, guys. You republished these incredibly significant works of British literature. You got covers for them. A lot of the covers I really, really liked. I really liked the effort you put into that, apart from editing the books, which... But we try not to talk about that, don't we? Right. So that was another fantastic achievement. But the real crowning achievement this year for Ian Fleming Publications was this book, On His Majesty's Secret Service. This took Bond fans by complete surprise. And I mean, it's, as far as it goes, this is living proof that we Bond fans can expect some great things coming in the future. So if you're not familiar with the fact, up until November of last year, all James Bond books were traditionally published. I think HarperCollins have been publishing the most recent ones, but when Ian Fleming first had Casino Royale published in 1953, it's by Jonathan Cape. They've been published by like Pan, Macmillan, all sorts of different iterations of the big five publishing houses. And in November of last year, the estate of Ian Fleming's family, got the rights to the James Bond books back, and instead of selling them off to another trad pub, they decided to start their own independent publishing house, which I love. I'm so excited about that. I mean, I am a self-published author. I've sold 69,000 copies of my books. I have proven that if you're a good author with half a brain, that you can actually make a living out of being a novelist. And independent publishing and self-publishing gives you so much of a better deal as an author than traditional publishing. There are bumps in the road. We're in the middle of an industry disruption, and there are 3 million books published every year through Kindle's self-publishing platform. A lot of them are Trek. A smaller amount are like worthwhile books that are just marketing correctly. But there is a small subsection of authors who are doing amazing stuff. There are 1,000 authors worldwide who make more than $100,000 a year self-publishing. I have been one of them, and I will be one of them again. But it just goes to show that right now in the industry, being self-published or having your own independent publishing house is the best way to take advantage of all of the opportunities that are out there. So Ian Fleming Publications creating its own publication house that's great. And then they proved how great it was, because in April of this year, they were like, 60th anniversary of the publication of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Maybe we should do something about that. And they looked in their library of Bond continuation authors and saw Charlie Higson, who wrote the Young Bond series, which was fantastic. Called him up, were like, "Hey Charlie, can you write a book for us?" And he was like, "All right then." And within 2 months, from conception to the bookshelf, Ian Fleming Publications made this happen. This would never have happened with a traditional publishing company. It would never have happened, not in a million years. I mean, poor Kim Sherwood, how stupid is it that they publish the book in the UK and it takes them 6 months to publish it in America? That's ridiculous. On His Majesty's Secret Service, I live in America. I managed to read this the day it was published. Admittedly on Kindle, but that's because all of these books, as it said here, got published in the UK, so they got sent out to America later. I don't mind that. Fair enough. I bought the hardback the day it was released. I got to read it the day it was released. Technically, that means I bought it twice, but I don't mind. This is the thing Ian Fleming Publications needs to remember. People like me, I don't mind spending my money on what you produce. That's the thing. I haven't bought any of the new republications of the original Ian Fleming books because they've been censored, they've been vandalized. And it's like, the proof is in the pudding. If you give me something that I want, I will buy it twice. And if you give me something that I really find insulting, I'm not going to spend any money on it at all. So there we go. But this book, terrific, an amazing achievement, because the book was also really good. It was really enjoyable. I picked it up and I plowed through it, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was a completely different vibe to With a Mind to Kill, and that was exactly what I needed. That's one of the things with Kim Sherwood's book. The genius behind that concept was James Bond is missing. So, you could have the Anthony Horowitz books, and you could have your meat and potatoes of the James Bond universe. And then Kim Sherwood was given the opportunity to tell a story in the Bond universe, but without the shackles and the burden of having to write a Bond story. And then, when Charlie Higson came in, he wrote a contemporary Bond. And he did a fantastic job with it. He did a really, really good job of making an incredibly fast-paced, enjoyable adventure story that delivered everything Bond fans want. And it was like it was like a breath of fresh air compared to the also wonderful Anthony Horowitz books. It was amazing. James Bond could exist in different flavors. And that's what we've got here. We've got the Sherwood verse, we've got the Horowitz verse, and then we've got the Higgins verse. It's great to have all these different flavors of Bond. That's what Bond is. And that's the opportunity that Ian Fleming Publications have, which leads me on to the question of, where do Ian Fleming Publications go next? And the wonderful thing about making this video is I, as you might have noticed, am a bit of a pretentious wanker. And having achieved some success in self-publishing, often I'm like, oh, well, here's what they need to do. And when I sat down to make this video, I realized Ian Fleming Publications doesn't need any advice from the likes of me. They're doing quite all right, thank you. So when I say what's next for Ian Fleming Publications, I'm not talking about what I think they should do. I'm thinking about what I think they will do. Because one way or another, like it or not, they have been very, very smart in everything they've done, except for editing the James Bond books. That was just so dumb. So dumb. But everything else they've done for a number of years has been really, really smart. And now they have the opportunity to do exactly that, just better and faster. And so what do I mean by that? What is the modus operandi of Ian Fleming Publications, or the James Bond brand? In literary terms, it seems like every couple of years they have produced a new James Bond book. So With a Mind to Kill was released last year. Yeah, and then I think it was 4 years before that, there was Forever and a Day. And I think it was a few years before that, there was Trigger Mortis. So it's every few years they have previously produced a James Bond book. And that's worked really well because, you know, James Bond has had a plethora of continuation novels. And it's very easy for them to sort of blend into one. It's like if a lot of people have been talking to me about, like, you know, I want to get started with a continuation novel. Shall I start with John Gardner? And it's kind of like, no, John Gardner was like spitting out product, really. And Raymond Benson was producing product. He's a craftsman, though. So Raymond Benson wrote, you know, a number of James Bond books. He put real effort in to make them really, really good. I don't think they were appreciated as for the quality of the writing at the time, because I think a lot of people were disdainful of Bond at that point. But he did a wonderful job. But again, they started spacing the books out a little more. And then when Sebastian Faulks was brought in, it was like, hey, this is an event. We have the author of Birdsong, and he's going to write a James Bond book, except it's a period James Bond book. It became an event. And then when Jeffrey Deaver's book was published, it was like, hey, this is a contemporary James Bond, whole new universe. And again, it was an event. It became interesting. Then you had William Boyd's book, and it was like, well, the Deaver thing didn't quite work out, but look, we got period Bond by another respected author. And that was interesting to people. And the way they upped it then, which was so good, was that they said, hey, you like the period James Bond, clearly. What if we got one of the like seminal writers of this particular generation, whose Alex Rider series is a worldwide phenomenon, and it was inspired by James Bond? Why don't we get him to write a trilogy of James Bond books? And each of those became an event. That's what Ian Fleming Publications has done so well. It is so easy for James Bond just to become like pizza. You know, every 2 years there's a James Bond book, and you go and chew down on your popcorn and you watch it, kind of like Fast and Furious has been. What you need to do for the James Bond brand to be successful, I think, moving forward, is every single book has to be an event. And that's what was so great about On His Majesty's Secret Service. What they did that was so clever, it's like, hey, we're going to write a modern day James Bond. And it's like, yeah, it's a breath of fresh air after the Anthony Horowitz books. The Anthony Horowitz books were like chef's kiss. This is a completely different flavour of Bond. Gets you interested. I'll get Charlie Higgins to write it. if you're a fan of James Bond, you are probably aware of the Young Bond series by Charlie Higgins. They were fantastic books. It's been 20 years since the first one came out, I think. So it's people like me, or people about 5 to 10 years younger than me, who suddenly get that wave of nostalgia, and they're like, Charlie Higgins is writing a modern day James Bond book. It was an event, and it was also tied to the coronation of King Charles III. It was an event. It was exciting. Right now, I go on Instagram all the time, and I see my friends in the Bond community posting their own pictures of this book, and it's like, it was exciting. And I have to admit, when With a Mind to Kill came out, it was exciting for us Bond fans, because we were all posting pictures of it, talking about it. I did a bunch of podcasts with a bunch of people. It was an event. So that's what Ian Fleming Publications need to do. They need to continue making each James Bond book an event that everybody gets excited about, not just Bond fans, but also people outside of Bond fandom. Again, this is where this worked out. It's like Charlie Higgins is an author who's actually quite familiar to a lot of people, because he was in a wonderful comedy series called The Fast Show. So, people are like, oh, I didn't know he also wrote books. Whereas Bond fans love him because they know he writes books. They know he wrote the Young Bond series. On His Majesty's Secret Service, oh, that's kind of familiar, that name. Oh, isn't it kind of relevant because we got the coronation of King Charles III. We're finally going to have a king. What made this book so special was the fact that they made it an event that wasn't just for Bond fans, but extended beyond Bond fans. And they did it in a way that was accessible and non-contentious, which worked really well for them. I will say, like with Kim Sherwood's books, one of the reasons some people loved it is because you actually had like a gay character, a black character, a disabled character, a Muslim. You had a female secret agent who had real autonomy. And a lot of people were like, oh, that's so woke. I don't necessarily think those critics carry much weight, but I will say that it is cool to have things that people are excited about that people don't think are like political in a way that people criticize, like Kim Sherwood's book. And there's more to that. So stick a flag in that, because we're going to revisit that as a particular topic, because I think that's interesting. But that's what made this book work. It was really accessible. It was really exciting for people who weren't just Bond fans. And yeah, the fact that they turned it around within 2 months was amazing. But it sets the bar high. It's like, hey, you have the means to publish whatever you want, however frequently you want from now on. Ian Fleming Publications, you are an independent publishing house. You could do that. And I think what they're going to do, what I hope they're going to do, is exactly that. They could, and I think they should, publish one James Bond book a year. That might seem like a lot, but I think what they should do is they should make each book an event. They should make each book interesting. There was a plan that they had in mind back in 1968 when they published Colonel Sun by, well, it was under the name Robert Markham. We all know who actually wrote it. But the plan was they were going to regularly publish James Bond books under the name, published as if by the name Robert Markham, but actually they were going to have different authors for each one. And I know that one of the ideas they had after after Raymond Benson's series with the book finished was to have, a different author every year. That's an idea that they floated around repeatedly quite a lot of the time. I think, who are they talking about? I think Charlie Hickson even said when the young Bond books came out, the original idea was he'd write the first one and then have a different author for each book. That's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea because then you can reach out to different authors who will appeal to different audiences. So if you're going to have a Bond book a year, but you did some experimentation with the authors, that could work really well. I mean, yeah, right now, you're in kind of like 90s nostalgia era. If next year you said, we're going to publish a brand new James Bond adventure, contemporary James Bond adventure by Raymond Benson, oh, I'd be there. I'd be there with bells on. Be like, Raymond Benson's writing another James Bond book. I loved those Bond books when I was a teenager. I'm going to get it. And that's what you do. You have an event. There, you have the opportunity. Ian Fleming Publications has the opportunity to come up with some really interesting ideas to make the books exciting, setting them in a contemporary period, setting them in the past, what they're about, who the author is. There is a real opportunity to once a year publish a new James Bond book. And as an independent publishing house, that could be incredibly profitable for them. It's worth pointing out that this book, On His Majesty's Secret Service, hit number 6 in the Amazon charts in the UK, which is not an insignificant achievement. So Ian Fleming Publications has proven that with the right book, the right author, the right delivery, they can knock it out of the park. And if they do that every year, I think they could continue going for years and have a really, really successful operation that connects with Bond fans, because it's all about making connections with Bond fans. That's what they did so well with this book. Yes, it appealed to a broader audience. That's what was so clever about it. But also, it really let us Bond fans know that Ian Fleming Publications understands us. I mean, they censored the Bond books. I don't know what the hell that was about. But with this, they really showed that they actually understood us. And so, yeah, one book a year. And they could do, like, you could get Raymond Benson to write a trilogy. Wouldn't that be exciting? You could get Charlie Higgins to write a trilogy. Wouldn't that be exciting? Who else could you get? Lee Child. Lee Child right now is sitting his ranch in Wyoming. Get him to write a James Bond book. That would be bloody interesting. And dare I say, you could even start to get weird with it. I think maybe people will push back on this. If you push back on this, drop a comment down below, let me know. But what if you hadn't? Wait. Honestly, I haven't drunk enough to come up with this idea. What if you had, like, James Bond met Jack Reacher? I mean, go on. I know it sounds a bit Scooby-Doo, like have Scooby-Doo met Batman and the Harlem Globetrotters and stuff, but just imagine James Bond meeting Jack Reacher. That could be kind of interesting. What other authors you could have? Oof. Yeah, the opportunity exists. However, I don't think Ian Fleming Publications should limit themselves to one book a year. No, they should publish one book every 6 months. Once a year, they publish a James Bond book. The meat and potatoes that appeals to their core audience. And then, once a year, 6 months interspersed, they also publish something like the 00 trilogy. Obviously, we're going to see the end of the 00 trilogy, another 2 books. And the wonderful thing about that is it gives a window into the James Bond fandom that might not otherwise exist to certain people. I mean, that's the thing that I've heard so many people say in praise of the Double or Nothing. Of Double or Nothing. Like, License to Queer it just speaks so beautifully about how significant it was to see representation that you didn't have in the James Bond universe before, right in this book, and make him feel part of it. And the wonderful thing is, if they publish a classic James Bond book every year, they can also publish a book that broadens things, that is inclusive, that is diverse, that experiments with stuff, that brings in other audiences. They can do that every year as well. They play off against each other. They balance each other. And the wonderful thing about that is it negates all criticism of that book. It's like, you shouldn't really criticize Double or Nothing. You can criticize it if you don't like the writing style or something like that. But in terms of the inclusivity that it represents, the different demographics that the 00 agents represent, how people who don't normally see themselves in the James Bond universe finally had somebody, a character that resonated with them. The book wouldn't exist otherwise. So how can you criticize it for existing? The fact that Ian Fleming Publications is in a position where they can publish a book like that and give those people who weren't represented before an opportunity to see themselves in the James Bond universe, why not? Why not do it? Isn't that something cool that they have the opportunity to do, that if they were part of the big trad pub universe, maybe they wouldn't be able to do in the same way? Maybe, you know, commercial pressures would lead them to not go down that route. But as an independent publishing house, they don't have those pressures. If they publish one meat and potatoes James Bond book every year, it should adequately cover for the success or failure of a book that broadens the horizon. You have one core James Bond book every year, and then every year you also have a book that broadens that James Bond universe, that goes and explores other places, other characters, just like they did with the Moneypenny Diaries, just like they did with the Young Bond series. I mean, if we're being honest, you know, they would have Bond continuation novels. The Young Bond series was outside of that, but it was interesting. That's what they can do. One book that's meat and potatoes, and then one book a year that is like sushi or tacos or whatever, a different flavor. And if they do that consistently, and they make the James Bond book a real event, and then they do something that's interesting and actually resonates with people in a broader audience, if they do those two books every single year, I think the opportunities that await Ian Fleming Publications are limitless. I really do think that they showed an incredible amount of depth of understanding of the James Bond universe, not just with On His Majesty's Secret Service, but also with the Anthony Horowitz books. They clearly started to get it, and now they can get it with the freedom and independence they never had before. So as much as I criticize Ian Fleming Publications for their horrible decision to censor the Ian Fleming books, I am very, very optimistic that they are going to do a fantastic job moving forward with the literary James Bond. And we as Bond fans need to give them a nudge in the right direction if they make stupid mistakes like censoring the books, but also we can take pleasure in encouraging them and supporting them and really making their decision to go independent worthwhile. I'm excited. As a fan of the literary James Bond character, I think the best years are still to come. So yeah, good job Ian Fleming Publications. I had a beer around here. Here is a toast to you. And I can't wait to see what's next. Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments section down below. And yeah, until then, I'll be back with another video soon. So stay cool. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.